herself when she gets going. A few housekeeping items for today's webinar. You can text questions in the Q&A box that's provided. You also have the ability to upvote questions that have been asked if you really want to hear the answer to that question, and Megan and I will try and answer it. You can check out birdsonthebay.ca to see our website and sign up for our mailing list. And I would like to acknowledge that I'm zooming into all of you from the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation. And this webinar is brought to you in part by a suite of project partners and funders, which we will cover as we move through the presentation. To start off today, I'm going to give a little bit of a background on what is Friends of Semiahmoo Bay Society, and then we'll move into focusing on the European green crab and the work that we've been involved with to date. We'll have a little bit of a Q&A, and then we'll close up with some thank yous and acknowledgements. So with that, we'll get started. So Friends of Semiahmoo Bay was founded in around 2001, and we're a 100% volunteer society based in Boundary Bay. And we work to preserve and restore and raise knowledge of the ecological values of the Boundary Bay ecosystem and its watershed. What we do is kind of grouped into three core streams, which includes environmental education and outreach programs, citizen science projects, and habitat enhancement projects. And so I'm just going to really quickly whip through some of those programs, hopefully get you excited about what we do, and encourage you to sign up to our mailing list, donate through our website, or get involved by volunteering in the Bay. So our environmental education programs include Beach Heroes, where we have people out roaming the beach and educating about invasive species and illegal shellfish harvesting and rules and regulations related to that. We have a Birds on the Bay program where we coordinate and promote bird and nature walks. We have our World Oceans Day, which we host in partnership with City of Surrey every year around June 2nd. We also have a series of school programs where we actually go into the classrooms and drop off like really interactive kits and do a presentation, and then we follow up with that with nature walks with these schools as field trips. And then through our communications, we have signs and brochures that we hand out at events, and we have a native plant demonstration garden in White Rock, which you can see almost near the pier. And then that second kind of stream is citizen science, where we do annual shoreline surveys to try and do long-term monitoring of intertidal habitats around Semiahmoo Bay and Crescent Beach and Blackie Spit. We do eelgrass mapping and monitoring, which has included kind of intertidal transects to try and monitor eelgrass change over time, as well as subtidal mapping to try and understand, the current extent of eelgrass in the bay, which is at threat by European green crab. We've run forage fish spawning habitat monitoring and assessment programs, and nest box stewardship. So, installing nest boxes and annually cleaning those out with volunteers. And then our habitat enhancement projects include invasive species removals, shoreline cleanups, and native plantings at Blackie Spit and the Little Campbell River. And, collectively, Friends of Semiahmoo Bay is, a product of all of the community of volunteers and many of those who are attending this webinar today, as well as various funders and other NGOs that partner with us to make all this work happen. So with that, I will hand it over to Megan to talk to you about the European green crab. We got involved with the European green crab program upon hearing through, I guess, a casual encounter at Crescent Beach from DFO staff, our former secretary, Sarah Brooks, who's now with the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation, encountered some staff out there, I think around this time of year, and said that they had found green crab in Boundary Bay, and they were they were concerned in wanting to understand the extent of it. And so with that, I started, probing around to see how I could coordinate a program and funding to support that program. And we ended up getting a few bits of seed funding, and we're able to hire a contract coordinator, Lori, who ran the program through the summer. And then as we've been able to assemble a little bit more money, we were able to bring Megan on in a contract capacity as well, and then engage a suite of volunteers, which have made this program very successful from the start. And we hope to expand it and allow it to grow, so that we stay on top of this problem before it becomes a bigger problem. So with that, I'll hand it over to Megan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. Oops, let's see there. Thank you everyone for coming out. Really appreciate it. So glad to see so many people are willing to educate themselves on the European green crab and just on the stuff that's happening in our backyard. So we do appreciate that. And as Matt said, my name's Megan Winand. I joined in October after Lori did a fantastic job running the summer portion. So mostly doing this presentation on her behalf. A lot of this is a lot of the work that she did. And I'll hopefully just be giving an overview of what European green crab is, what it means to British Columbia, and what work we're doing currently, and how those who are interested can get involved and help grow this program as we see fit. So in BC, a lot of us are extremely lucky that we get to have views like this in our backyard. Maybe not this one in particular, but something similar where there's water, and twice a day we are exposed to an amazing intertidal ecosystem that is just thriving with life. This ecosystem was something that was brand new to me. Actually, in 2016, I was a beach hero. It was my first job moving to British Columbia, and it was an amazing experience. I got to learn so much about the intertidal zone, and also the amount of responsibility we have as beachgoers, just understanding even the basics of what it is to be a native and invasive species, and the role that we play that can help programs like this so much if you can actually understand those two. And I'll explain a little bit more about how being a beachgoer is important and what you can do to help with this program. So part of my love of being a beach hero is making sure that people know how to identify a native and invasive species. So on here I have some pretty typical crabs that we'll find in the area. One of them is the European green crab. If you know which one it is already, give yourself a pat on the back. If you don't, not to worry, because I'll be going through that just quickly, just giving you an idea of what each one looks like and how we can ID them so that you can be confident on the beach when you're going out. So the first two are my favorite. I'll refer to them as our native shore crabs. They're the ones that we typically find under the rocks. If you have kids and you're at the beach, it's usually the ones that you're picking up and putting in a bucket. So the first one is our hairy shore crab, famously named because it's got these beautiful hair on its legs. It also has 3 points on either side of its eyes. These points are pointed more outwards compared to our purple shore crab, where they're a little more rounded. A great example someone gave me was that if you were to run the hairy shore crab along your sweater, it would probably catch, where a purple shore crab would probably just slide right off because they're pretty rounded at the top, but it still has 3 points similar to the hairy shore crab. The purple shore crab does not have any hair on its leg. It usually gets to be about a toonie size and sometimes is purple, and also has this nice little pentagon shape. So the next two are conventional commercial crabs. A lot of people on piers and along the beach will be setting up crab traps so that they can capture one of these guys. The first one is our red rock crab. It has these thick black tipped claws at the top. It has 10 points on either side of its eyes, which is different than our hairy shore crab that only had 3. It's also more of a fan shape, and it ranges around 11.5 centimeters from tip to tip, going lengthwise. The next one is our Dungeness crab. It has claws that have small serrations along the top of its claws. It's more of an oval shape compared to a red rock crab. Also, still has 10 points on either side of its eyes, but it's a lot bigger and ranging around that 16.5 centimeter range. Next is our graceful crab. Our graceful crab also has 10 points on either side of its eyes. It's more of an oval shape and a little bit thicker than our Dungeness crab, but its widest point it's at its 9th point compared to its 10th point like the Dungeness crab. And last but not least is our European green crab. So if you guessed the last one was it, you got it right. And my flair for drama will never end. So yes, this is the European green crab, the thing we're talking about, the giant monster that's now living in our backyard. And the big thing to know when you're trying to ID it is this 5-3-5 approach. It has 5 points on either side of its eyes and 3 in the center. And this is the biggest thing to note because no other native crab has this distinguished feature. The European green crab is the only one that has 5 points on either side of its eyes. It also has this pentagon shape if that helps you ID it, but the main thing is that 5-3-5. And we don't go off of color for any species, despite the fact that most European green crabs in adult form are green. When they are juveniles, they can be a wide range of colors and look very similar to our native shore crabs, especially when they're younger. So it's really important that everything, if there's anything you remember from how to ID a native and invasive shore crab, it's knowing 5-3-5. All right, so now that we know what they look like, let's talk about how they got here. So they are native to western and northern shorelines of Europe. They were introduced into San Francisco Bay in 1989 and the Sook Basin along west coast of Vancouver Island in 1998. It's suspected that the introduction of European green crab to the west coast was brought in as a result of non-agriculture shellfish transfer. And this is important to maybe take a pause and make sure that everyone understands that introduction and established populations are two different things. When a species is introduced, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to take off. It still has the opportunity to fail, depending on our habitat conditions or some predators. When it's an established population, it means that it's actually having reproductive adults and has some genetic diversity. So it was up in 1998, it was actually introduced into the area, but it wasn't until 2012 that European green crab was actually considered or confirmed to be an established population in Sook Basin. And since then, it's been able to transfer itself in its zooplankton form or its larvae form. You can kind of see it in the life cycle here that I have as an image. And this is really important because this is mostly how it transfers. The adults can lay up to 200,000 eggs at a time and can reproduce more than once in a year. And this larval can be transferred through ocean currents and ballast waters for up to 80 or 90 days, typically spreading upward and northern currents, especially here on the West Coast. And it has been detected as far as Prince Rupert. So if you want to get an up-to-date version on where this European green crab is located in BC, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, I'll refer to as DFO, in partnership with Pacific Salmon Foundation, has made this wonderful map showing the distribution. This map is continuously updated and is always being fed with information from the public and from organizations like ourselves. And the link is at the bottom here, but I'm happy to send that out as an email to people afterwards as a resource if you want to take a look. And this is important alongside with knowing how to ID a native and invasive species, because it wasn't until 2020 that someone was walking along the beach in Haida Gwaii and happened to come across a dead crab. They realized that the crab looked different, and they decided to take a photo, leave it where they found it, and email that photo to the email here. It was then confirmed from DFO that it was in fact a European green crab. And if it wasn't for this person who was able to at least know that it probably wasn't a native species, we now know that there's European green crab potentially in Haida Gwaii, and we need to put some action into that area. So using that 5-3-5 method, looking at the map, you can help yourself by knowing if you're in an area that already has European green crab, or if you're in an area that hasn't been either looked at yet or is not confirmed, and be that beach hero that make sure that we are all in this together and trying to ID what's happening on the ground and knowing where European green crab is going. So the main thing to note, if you're looking for a European green crab, or if you think you might have come across one, it's most likely going to be in the intertidal zone. They do hang out in shallow subtidal when they're adults, but typically they'll be in the intertidal. In most areas where they're actually native, so like Europe, they typically hang out in like really rocky structures, but something about the West Coast and the East Coast, they're really enjoying this estuary intertidal zone, more of like a muddy substrate. So we're mostly going to see them on the beach if you were to come across one at low tide when you're going through the intertidal zone. All right, so the big question, what is the issue? Why do we care about the European green crab? Our planet is already facing a lot of issues. We're facing climate change, pollutants, habitat loss, and loss of biodiversity. I'm not sure if everyone's seen this paper that came out last week, but it was quite alarming and indicating that if we continue under business as usual scenarios, that 2/3 of the species in the Fraser River estuary are predicted to have less than a 50% probability of persistence over 25 years. Which is scary enough that introducing other invasive species like the European green crab could just exacerbate these issues and disrupt the food web through competition and predation, and disrupt how the native species interact and their threats to themselves already. So another thing is the fact that they are quite aggressive species. Their aggression is probably one of the things that we note as a big impact to our native species. Because they're so aggressive, when they're younger, they like to hang out in areas that are safe and away from our adult Dungeness and red rock crabs, but they like to displace juvenile Dungeness and red rock crabs by eating them or moving them outside of their habitat. Their aggression level can change, as you can see in the video here that was done by the University of New England. This was a university in Maine in the United States, where they're looking at how aggressive this species is against our native species. And through this too, when they do establish a population, because they can thrive in such a variety of temperatures and salinities, they start off not causing as much harm, but then they start moving out because they can be cannibalistic and they don't all want to stay in one area. So they'll spread, take over all these other places and start displacing native species that were otherwise using that habitat. So why is this an issue? Well, when they're aggressive like that and they take over new places and they're starting to look for food, they like to burrow for their food. And part of our backyard is also this beautiful marsh that we have lots of scientists working on right now to try to maintain, because they're depleting at an alarming rate already, that the introduction of European green crab coming in and taking over and destroying more of our marsh that is essential for so many things is not ideal. This marsh plays a huge part in our cultural significance as flood management, especially in areas like Delta and Richmond. It's a significant source for in critical habitat for shorebirds and migrating and wintering waterfowl. It also acts as nursery habitat for salmonids, and we want to protect this marsh. So what I mean by burrowing, you can see on the left here, there's a photo of our native shore crabs that also have the same behavior, where they burrow into the mud and they can take out some of the roots. They do this for food purposes as well, looking for prey. But with European green crabs, they're so much bigger that they're not really creating little burrows, they're more creating giant tunnels underneath the mud. And this takes away our root sources. It displaces the sediment, makes it loose, and then is vulnerable to wind and wave action that will erode it. So on the right, you can kind of see too, a great example of what happens after a European green crab is introduced into a marsh. On the left side is what the marsh plant roots looked like before the European green crab and after. And this is important because these plants are essential for other species, for cultural use, and for maintaining the shoreline. So then the big ticket thing, and the thing that we're really concerned about, is our eelgrass. Eelgrass, as many people know, is an extremely important food source, nursery, and refuge for birds, fish, crabs, and many other native marine invertebrates. It plays an important role in carbon cycling and might even reduce local effects of ocean acidification. It has the ability to improve water quality by filtering sediment and nutrients, and can stabilize the sea floor and help avoid erosion. And with eelgrass in particular, it is a very sensitive plant. It's better to protect what we have than try to restore it. Restoring eelgrass has been proven to be quite difficult. Nikki Wright with Sea Change has done a lot of work in trying to do this, and she can probably contest to the fact that eelgrass is quite picky. It likes certain salinities and temperature, sediment, and elevation, that protecting it is our #1 goal. This photo here is quite alarming in that statement. This was taken by Hillary Nichols in the States on the East Coast, and this was a pre and post European green crab introduction into this area. They did do a study to confirm whether or not this was mostly done because of European green crab and not other factors, and they can agree that yes, this was the cause of European green crab. There's also a person from Department of Fisheries and Oceans who did her PhD at Simon Fraser University, Brett Howard. She also looked at if these effects of eelgrass will also happen here on the West Coast. And her results show that there is a high probability that we could see similar results like this. So this is our main concern and the driving point home to why we're so concerned about European green crabs is protecting our eelgrass. And by protecting our eelgrass, we're protecting our areas for our salmon, for birds, and essentially moving up into the food chain into our mammals like our southern resident killer whales, which are already at risk and endangered. So that leads into why we partnered or came in partnership with Department of Fisheries and Oceans. They have been amazing in helping us. We've applied for permits in order to do this European green crab trapping as part of the monitoring efforts. And through that, we're given extensive training on how to ID them, how to survey properly. And in turn, we share our data and it's uploaded and made sure that it's available for everyone to the public on that website map that I was showing you. And this is all part of the early detection rapid response program since European green crab was first discovered in Boundary Bay in 2019. So since then, we've been involved, as Boundary Bay is our home and bread and butter of what we like to do and where we like to work. This was just the next step in making sure that we can protect our valuable ecosystem. So where are we surveying? We're surveying in this area here. You can see my green dots of where we've actually went out this summer. The first one is in Blackie Spit. To date, we've found there's been a total of 5 European green crabs in this area that DFO has found. The next one is on 72nd. This area is identified as appropriate habitat for European green crabs. So we're surveying there to see if any of them will come into the area. Similar results for Centennial, but DFO has found 3 green crabs here. For Highway 1, similar idea. We're looking because it has great habitat and as well for Semiahmoo First Nation. So when they did start this program, a big part of it was IDing or identifying where a suitable habitat would be in the Boundary Bay area and where the European green crab would most likely want to establish itself should it actually get to that stage. So this is why in some places we've already found European green crab and we'll continue to survey there. And we're also being preemptive in our management decisions and trying to make sure that we look in areas that it could occur. So when we get to these areas, you can see Lori on the right-hand side setting up a minnow trap, and on the left we have a fukui trap. These are set with bait of cat food and set at, say, one day around the lowish tide and set overnight. Crabs are more active at night, so we want to make sure that they have the opportunity when they're the most active to come into the traps. And then the next day we show up before it gets too low of a tide again and pull them out. When we pull them out, we dump everything into the bucket. As you can see, this is a picture actually from Blackie Spit that happened over the summer. And in these buckets, we take photos of each one. This makes sure that we are also identifying things properly and that DFO can confirm that our data is accurate and we're not mis-IDing anything as a shore crab or a European green crab. So that being said, the volunteers of Friends of Semiahmoo Bay to date have captured a lot of sculpins, shore crabs, hermit crabs, and stickleback, but thankfully, none of the volunteers this summer found any European green crab. All of those that were found were found by DFO last year and a couple this year. So on top of actually doing the trapping, we're also looking at vegetation surveys. There was some thought that European green crab might be attracted to areas with a lot of sea asparagus. So part of Friends of Semiahmoo Bay is just taking it one step further and following some of the protocols from the Washington crab team and looking at transects or setting up transects along the shorelines that we're capturing our European green crabs, or setting traps for them and doing some vegetation surveys. Most of our sites have a muddy substrate and lots of rooted vegetation, and this corresponds with ideal habitat for European green crabs. So we can say with certainty that we're in areas that they would most likely want to be if they were to establish a population. We're just lucky enough that this year we didn't find any. And all this work is done by our volunteers. And none of this could have been possible without them, especially during 2020 when we had COVID and everything was a little bit messy. We're extremely thankful for our project coordinator, Lori, and all of our volunteers that managed to come out time after time, because the surveys do take 2 days, 1 day to set and 1 day to take down. It is a little more time consuming, and we're very happy that these people wanted to be involved, and we look forward to hopefully having more people next year. Also to our funders for providing us with money to actually have a coordinator, to get equipment, and to do our work that we want to do, and making sure that we can have a coordinator in place and hopefully work on some more educational and outreach projects that will be available to secondary schools. And now I will open up to any questions. I also will provide, these are the resources that I used. This includes some of the papers and different resources for some of the information that I provided.
Let's see. One question we have is, can you eat them? Megan, would you like to? Or would you like me to?
Yes, I can definitely answer that. So yes, you can technically eat them. There is actually groups on the East Coast that are trying to make cookbooks, finding new ways to make it entertaining. That being said, here on the Pacific region, it hasn't been approved yet by Health Canada to actually be a food source. So while you can technically eat them, it has not been approved to be an actual food source here. So Lori, you asked the same question, so hopefully that answered that. The next one here, why were they introduced in the first place? Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, just because we have more people and more transit and more ways of transporting things, a lot of stuff gets mixed around. A lot of things end up on the bottom of boats and unfortunately are not cleaned properly. In this case, though, they were introduced into the west coast of Canada by non-aquaculture shellfish transfer. In other places, though, it has been known that they are transferred through ballast water, and then after that, it's mostly through their larval stage that's spending 80 to 90 days in currents in ballast water and transferring itself just by wave action to other places. Okay, why did the green crab population collapse in Washington state? So the European green crab population did not actually collapse in Washington state. I didn't actually put that into the presentation, but I'm glad you brought it up. So in 2006, Washington did find an established population. In 2016, they found an established population. They've been monitoring since 2006, and they do have a full Washington state crab team that is out there doing this work. And they are finding a lot more European green crab than we have been finding in Boundary Bay. So their population still exists, and we think it actually came back down from our established population in Sook Basin, and through larval dispersal came back into Washington State and actually established a population. So there is a team down there that's working hard on that. And through their partnership and transboundary agreement with Department of Fisheries and Oceans, they've been working together to make sure that all of our programs are on the same page and we're using the same techniques in order to help bring down the population. Okay. In areas where it is invaded, can they be used for something like fertilizer? I'm not sure about fertilizer. That one I actually haven't heard of. Like I said, some people are looking at different ways of using it for food. But unfortunately, I haven't seen anything about fertilizer. I will take a look and see if I find anything, and I can post it later on if I do. Do they actually eat eelgrass? And what about small crustaceans and mussels? Yeah, awesome question. So they're not actually eating the eelgrass. What happens is they come into these areas and they're looking for food. So they're actually burrowing and digging out the eelgrass. So they're essentially ripping it up as they're looking for mussels and crustaceans that might be underneath the mud. So they're not actually eating the eelgrass. It's more of a byproduct of them. It's a byproduct of the eelgrass being decimated because they're looking for food. David, do you plan some kind of control? I don't think I understand the question. Maybe you can rephrase that. In terms of control, maybe you're thinking of like how we're controlling the population. On the east coast of Vancouver, or sorry, the west coast of Vancouver Island, there's a group called Coastal Restoration Society that's working day and night trying to see how they can bring the population down in the Sook Basin. But right now, because we're in the early stages of its introduction, we're at the prime time where we can go in and try to trap them and reduce any green crabs that are there before they become a population. So hopefully that answers your question on control. All right, from James. So I take it that since it is not always obvious which species it is it like the Prussian carp, which is generally killed on site? So it actually depends. That's a great question. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans, depending on how many they find. So if they go out and they go trapping or surveying for one, and they end up getting a bunch of European green crabs, they will kill them on site, typically through smushing them. However, if they don't find a lot of them or there's a small amount, they want to freeze them. And by freezing them, it allows us to do genetic testing later on so that we can identify where this green crab actually came from and determine if there's a source or a population that maybe we don't know about, or if it's all coming from the same area. So that answer kind of varies. If there's a lot, they kill them on site. If there's not a lot, they like to freeze them so they can use it for genetic testing later on. Do they eat them? So I kind of mentioned this before. Doreen, you mentioned that they burrow for food and destroy plant roots. Do they eat them? To my knowledge, they're not actually eating the plants. It's more that when they're burrowing and looking for food, it's almost like when you're swimming and you hit things, like they're moving with their claws, they're hitting the roots and they're pulling them out as they're making their holes or digging their tunnels. And that in turn destroys the plants. But in terms of them actually eating the plants, I'm not familiar with that. Okay, Danielle, why is it so hard to restore eelgrass? Eelgrass is very picky, and I think I actually want to move this question over to Matt, because Matt is actually doing his master's right now in eelgrass, and he is a fantastic source. So Matt, do you want to jump in on this question?
So eelgrass restoration, I guess on the Pacific coast, I guess the common thing that we refer to is the eelgrass doesn't generally regenerates through asexually through the rhizomes, as opposed to through the flowers and seed spread on the I guess the Atlantic coast. I haven't actually confirmed that fully yet, but that's what I've heard through the people that I've worked with. So by that nature, the dispersal is more limited because it's only throwing off shoots through the roots, and making it more challenging to restore the bed. And the tolerance, I guess, of eelgrass is more specific, especially for native eelgrass. They need a certain kind of light availability and salinity range and substrate to support its growth.
Yeah, that's awesome response. And another thing to add too is that because eelgrass is loved by so many native species, there's actually videos that you can see as soon as people or like divers, when they go out and they're putting the plugs of the eelgrass into the sediment, it's this horde of like crabs and native species that are just coming flying in because they really want the eelgrass. So sometimes even as you're planting the eelgrass, it's actually hard to establish it because so many native species are just so excited to use it that they actually destroy it. So it's a really hard balance to restore eelgrass. It's way better to protect it. Okay, Sean Boyd, you had another question here. Any idea if they are present along the rocky beach between White Rock and Crescent Beach? Not to my knowledge. So as I kind of mentioned, it seems though in their native, like in Europe where they're native, they like more of this rocky shoreline. But over here on the in Canada, on the East Coast and the West Coast, they seem to enjoy more of our estuaries, more of like a muddy or sediment substrate and some rocky beaches, but not to the extent that I would see in White Rock and Crescent Beach. And when we were doing some of our discussions with DFO on determining like where we should be trapping based on their habitat types and what is suitable for them and what the crabs would probably like if they were actually going to establish, that rocky beach between White Rock and Crescent Beach wasn't one of them. And I think that's because we're finding them more in this estuary-like condition instead of this more rocky shore condition. Okay, Karen, what is their maximum size? So they max out around 10 centimeters lengthwise, so I guess about there. So they're bigger than our native shore crabs, but they're a little bit smaller than our red rock crabs. So that kind of gives you that medium size, and that's also why they don't like to hang out in the subtidal area when they're adults, because they're smaller than our Dungeness and our red rocks. So they increase their vulnerability to be predated on by our native Dungeness and red rock. And they like to hang out more in the intertidal where they're involved with like our native shore crabs, which are pretty small, around like toonie size. So they're about a medium size between all of them. Okay, anonymous and attendee. I have seen some strange crab shells there too. I thought they were soft shell crab. I'm trying to find a photo I took. If you do find a photo, here, I can try to go back to, oops, where did I put it? Here. So this here, if you want to write this down, or we can try to send it out. This is where you would enter or send your photo if you were to find one. So the biggest thing is that you take the photo, leave it where you found it. Please do not take any crabs home that you think might be European green crab, because if you're wrong, then you're taking home a native crab. And if you're right, then we'll have a trained team come in and actually do surveying in that area. So take the photo, leave it where you found it, and send that photo to this email. Okay, what are your primary plans for spring and summer monitoring or eradication? Yay, awesome. Well, if you're interested, anonymous attendee, we are definitely looking for volunteers, potentially a coordinator. Matt can speak a little bit more to that, that will become involved with our program. So this year, because of COVID and how things worked out, we didn't really get to start surveying until later on in the summer. And that might be why we didn't find a European green crab. But hopefully next year, what we're hoping is that we start early and have a really long season so that we can hit all these places, especially like our are really important ones where we know there's European green crab, and areas where we think there might be, and extend out our monitoring season. And I don't know, Matt, do you want to add anything into that?
No, I guess I'll try and touch on a few of these comments around that. So Rob Knight, Brunswick Point and the marsh and the mubbleys that are out there, and Sean's comment around the salinity range. So these are invasive species. They are pretty good generalists. So they have actually a wide range, and from discussions with DFO, we've found them in kind of more estuarine and even like less saline conditions than you would expect for most crabs. That being said, right now we started with a small program and kind of pieced together some funding and some volunteers. And as we continue to grow the awareness and pull together more volunteers and some more funding, then we'll work with DFO and Tsawwassen First Nation and Semiahmoo First Nation to expand the number of sites and the monitoring network that we have in the Delta. Obviously, the Fraser Delta in and of itself is globally significant.
Awesome. So yeah, that kind of answers that question. So what can be done to limit their population once established? Matt kind of addressed that, exactly what we're doing right now. This is exactly what we should be doing in order to limit their population before they establish. And once they establish, it's a whole different management plan that will go through DFO. So we won't be involved in that decision making, but we will just be here to support as a partner in whatever they decide if the European green crab does become an established population.
I think in general, it leads to a more rigorous trapping program where you, but again, that's a decision that will be led by DFO, and wherever our partnership lies with that, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But with all of you fantastic attendees and volunteers, I'm confident that we'll keep this at an early detection program and we'll be able to prevent that from happening.
Yeah. Okay, Elizabeth, what are the natural predators of the crab? Great question. So in Europe, their natural predators are other big crabs, seals, mink, otters, some other fish species, pretty well anything that's bigger than the crab itself, which is why I think when it comes over here, it likes to hang out in areas where it's the bigger crab, so that it's not being invaded by other predators. Sean, I think Matt already kind of brought in the salinity range tolerance. Matt, correct me if I'm wrong with your other question. Yeah, okay. All right, we'll go on to Bonnie. What actions are being taken where green crabs are detected? Is it possible to eradicate them? So we've kind of answered a lot of this question, but I'll touch on the last point, if it's possible to eradicate them. It's every invasive species team's goal to want to be able to eradicate something. That being said, the term eradication is very difficult to achieve. It's something that we would like, but depending on how the European green crab continues to be introduced into new areas, and if it does become a population, it might change that answer. I don't know, Matt, if you want to interject.
No. I think we'll probably answer one or two more questions, and there's a few questions that have kind of come up repeatedly, so we'll try and capture those, and when we send out a follow-up email, we'll kind of have like an FAQs for everyone and some resources. I think maybe in just steering this, Donna came in a little bit late. Maybe quickly review how to ID one. I think that's a really important takeaway for today's webinar.
Absolutely, and that's another question that I think someone RL mentioned about the juveniles and does this 5-3-5 rule stand. So for those who came in late, I can show my beautiful slide here. This is how you identify them. This 5-3-5 rule applies as juveniles and as adults. So it's important, again, not to use the color green as your indication, although they're typically green when they're adults. Doesn't mean that they're always green, as you can see in this photo here, that all the juveniles can be different colors. But if you look closely at the photo, you can still see that they have this 5-3-5 distinguished characteristics. So yes, even as juveniles, you will see that, and that's why it's really important to take home that 5-3-5 rule, 5 on either side of the eyes and 3 in the center. Is there any other questions, Matt, that you'd like, that we think we should answer?
Do you know what time of year they breed?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I assume they're similar to native crabs, so they probably start their molting in May or June. But I can look into that and get a better answer when we send out our FAQs. Okay,
great. So with that, I will turn to some kind of closing remarks and comments. We've talked a little bit about our goals for next year. So we want to, continue to monitor the established sites, and we want to expand that monitoring program as the resources permit us to do. So all of you, if you want to sign up, that's excellent. We also are accepting donations through birdsonthebay.ca/donate. We will provide a link to that in the follow-up email. We accept e-transfer or PayPal. This project was also brought to us in part. Megan, did you have the funding slide, or?
Do I have under slide? Yes,
so,
just at the end here.
Yeah, so thank you to DFO for the expertise and guidance in allowing us to deliver this program and work alongside them. Funding from BC Nature Club Support Grant, the Port of Vancouver, White Rock City, and then thank you for the teacher education program at UBC for providing this webinar platform, and Project Learning Tree, a sustainable forestry initiative program for the wage top up for hiring Megan this fall. And we typically do hire beach heroes or coordinators in a limited capacity through the summer and in the fall if the funding is available. And we strive to hire youth and Indigenous and all cultures to be involved in the program. So if you know someone or you want to be that person, please let us know and we can keep you on the list when we have those postings. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Lori to briefly touch on a few comments. So, Megan, if you know how to make Lori talk. Sorry. There you go.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yes. Sorry, were there, I just got a message from Christy Harrison, who's our high school teacher who's helping to recruit students to help with our research. And she just let me know that our grade 11 biology teacher, Miss Morley, is on this call. And that was 24 years ago that I was in her high school class. So I just wanted to say hi to her to start off with. But were there any specific questions that needed to be addressed to me? Sorry, I haven't been following the chat line.
No, I think that's all. So with that, again, we'll follow up with an email with some of the frequently asked questions for this webinar. And thank you all for attending today. And we look forward to seeing you signing up on our website, birdsonthebay.ca, for our mailing list. We are not spammers, probably up to one time a month we send an email, but probably not even that frequently. So it's a great way to stay involved. Otherwise, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Unless you're me running the Eventbrite and you can't figure out how to send emails to attendees, sorry about that. Then you only get spam. That's the only time. It's only when I'm in charge, sorry.
I really look forward to seeing everybody next summer during our sampling season. So hopefully we'll see a bunch of you there.
Okay. All right, with that, we will close the session.